At 72, I thought I knew everything about betrayal until that moment at the hotel reception desk when my own family abandoned me with a $4,300 bill. The night manager's words still echo in my ears. "Your family mentioned you'd be handling the payment, Mrs. Parker." My hands trembled as I realized the truth. I was nothing but a convenient wallet to them. What they didn't know was that I had already paid for everything in advance. And as I stood there in that empty lobby at midnight, something inside me finally broke. "Cancel every room," I whispered, clutching my late husband's mysterious safety deposit box key in my pocket. They slept peacefully upstairs, unaware that I had just ignited a war that would expose decades of family secrets, lies, and betrayals that would change all our lives forever. If you've ever been taken advantage of by the people who should love you most, follow my channel for the full story of how I discovered the shocking truth about my family and the choice I ultimately had to make. Like, subscribe, and comment below where you're watching from. Trust me, nothing is more devastating or more satisfying than finally standing up for yourself after a lifetime of being invisible. My name is Eleanor, and at 72, I can still taste the metallic fear that flooded my mouth that night. The grand chandelier of the Charleston Heritage Hotel cast shadows across the empty lobby. As I stood there, alone and invisible, the night manager's voice cut through the silence, polite but firm, each word slicing into me like a blade. "Mrs. Parker, we need to discuss the room charges. Your family mentioned you'd be handling the bill." My heart stopped. The blood drained from my face. My knees nearly buckled beneath me. They had done it again. My own flesh and blood had set me up to be the scapegoat, the forgotten old woman useful only when there were bills to pay or blame to assign. I glanced around the ornate lobby with its antique furnishings and the lingering scent of day-old coffee. The grandfather clock in the corner ticked away, marking each second of my humiliation. Upstairs, they were sleeping peacefully. My daughter Catherine, her husband Robert, my nephew James, and his wife Diane, my son-in-law's sister Melanie, all of them resting without a care, while I stood here, trembling. "Ma'am?" The night manager, his name tag read Thomas, peered at me with a mixture of concern and impatience. "The total comes to $4,978.53 for the 5 rooms over 4 nights. I wanted to scream. I wanted to storm upstairs and confront them all. But the sound caught in my throat, suffocating me with unspoken words. Instead, I felt a single tear trace down my cheek and quickly wiped it away before Thomas could notice. It wasn't just about the money. It was about the betrayal, the calculated cruelty of it all. They had planned this, smiling at me over dinner hours earlier, including me in their conversations just enough to maintain appearances, all while knowing what they had arranged for me at the front desk. "Give me a moment," I whispered, my voice barely audible. I retreated to a leather armchair in the corner, my hands shaking as I fumbled with my worn purse. As I sat there, a memory surfaced, sharp and clear as crystal. My husband Richard, 6 years gone now, in his hospital bed, his voice weak but urgent as he pressed a small key into my palm. "There's a safe deposit box, Ellie," he had whispered, his breathing labored. "In Charleston, First National on King Street. Everything you might need someday is there. Tell no one, not even Catherine." At the time, I'd been too grief-stricken to question him. Why Charleston, a city we'd visited only twice? Why the secrecy? But Richard had always been the careful one, the planner, the protector. Even from his deathbed, he was trying to shield me from something I was beginning to understand. I felt the weight of the key in my coat pocket, where I'd kept it close since arriving in Charleston 3 days ago. I hadn't visited the bank yet. Somehow, I'd been waiting for a sign that the time was right. This was it. With newfound resolve, I stood and walked back to the reception desk. Thomas looked up expectantly, his fingers hovering over the computer keyboard. What he didn't know, what none of them knew, was that I had already paid for everything in advance. Every room, every meal charged to those rooms, every service. I had transferred the money silently 2 weeks before our trip, When Catherine had suggested I might want to treat the family to this reunion weekend, I had done it because I loved them, because I wanted to give them this time together without worry. But now, standing before Thomas with my dignity in tatters, something inside me cracked open. A lifetime of being taken for granted, of being the convenient solution, of being invisible until needed. It all crystallized in that moment. "Thomas," I said, my voice surprisingly steady now. "I've already paid for these rooms in advance." His fingers flew across the keyboard, confusion etched on his face. "Yes, ma'am, I see that now. I apologize for the confusion." I nodded but didn't move. Something was holding me there, some new emotion taking root where fear had been moments before. "Is there anything else I can help you with tonight, Mrs. Parker?" Thomas asked. I took a deep breath, feeling the weight of Richard's key in my pocket and the even heavier weight of decades of quiet compliance. "Yes," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "Cancel every room." Thomas blinked, clearly startled. "I'm sorry?" "Cancel them all," I repeated, louder now. "Effective immediately." "But ma'am, your family?" "Will need to make other arrangements." The words tasted strange on my tongue. Powerful, forbidden, necessary. Thomas hesitated, his fingers frozen above the keyboard. "Are you certain? It's nearly midnight." I thought of Catherine's dismissive tone at dinner, of my nephew James's snickering phone calls whenever I entered the room, of how they'd all conveniently disappeared when it came time to settle the lunch bill earlier that day. I've never been more certain of anything in my life, and as Thomas began processing my request, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years, perhaps decades. It wasn't vindication. It wasn't even anger. It was the quiet, sure knowledge that my silent revenge was just beginning. And upstairs, they slept on, unaware that their world was about to change forever. I barely slept that night. My small suitcase rested by the door, packed and ready for a hasty departure. The digital clock on the nightstand glowed 4:17 a.m., its red numbers illuminating the darkness of my room, the only room in the hotel still registered under our family name. As I lay there, my hands still trembled, not from fear anymore, but from something else, something that felt dangerously close to power. I traced the outline of Richard's key through the fabric of my nightgown pocket, where I'd transferred it for safekeeping. The metal was warm against my fingertips, having absorbed my body heat through the hours of a restless turning. Why did Richard leave me this mysterious safety deposit box in Charleston? The question had haunted me for 6 years, but now it pounded in my head with renewed urgency. Charleston wasn't even a city we knew well. We'd visited twice, once for a medical conference when Richard was still practicing, and once for a distant cousin's wedding. Yet somehow, he'd arranged this secret box here, as if he'd known I would need it precisely in this place, at this moment. "One day you'll need this, Ellie. Trust me." His last words to me in private, spoken with such intensity that they'd branded themselves into my memory. His blue eyes, clouded with pain medication, but still sharp with intelligence, had held mine with a desperate clarity. "Don't tell anyone, not family, not friends, no one." I rolled onto my side, watching the headlights of an occasional car sweep across the ceiling. Richard had always been protective, but never secretive. At least, I'd never thought so. After 43 years of marriage, I'd believed I knew every corner of his heart. But this key suggested otherwise. It suggested hidden depths, untold worries. It suggested he'd anticipated trouble long before I could see it coming. And now that trouble had a name. Several names, actually. Catherine, my only daughter. Robert, her husband of 20 years. James, my nephew, who'd practically grown up in our home after my sister's death. Diane, James's wife, who'd always looked at our family possessions with calculating eyes. Melanie, Robert's sister, who'd invited herself along on this family reunion weekend despite barely qualifying as family. I could picture them all sleeping upstairs, unaware that their comfortable beds would be yanked out from under them in just a few hours. My stomach clenched at the thought of the coming confrontation. I'd never been one for conflict. Richard had always handled the difficult conversations, the setting of boundaries, the firm no when necessary. I was the peacemaker, the one who smoothed things over, who made everyone feel welcome and loved. But where had that gotten me? Here, alone at 4:23 a.m., betrayed by the very people I'd spent a lifetime nurturing. I slipped out of bed and padded to the window, pulling back the heavy curtain. Charleston's historic district lay quiet below, street lamps casting pools of golden light on cobblestone streets. Beautiful, dignified, hiding centuries of secrets behind pristine facades. Much like families, I supposed. Looking out at the sleeping city, I began noticing small, troubling details from the past few days, clues I'd dismissed in my eagerness to believe in this happy family reunion. Catherine checking her watch whenever I spoke, as if timing how long she had to endure my stories. James stepping away for hushed phone calls, his eyes darting to me with suspicious frequency. Diane asking pointed questions about Richard's estate, disguised as casual conversation. Robert's uncharacteristic insistence that I join them on this trip, when he'd spent 20 years avoiding family gatherings. And then there were the whispers, the sudden silences when I entered rooms, the exchanged glances over dinner. I'd attributed it all to my paranoia, to the loneliness that had made me oversensitive since Richard's death. But what if it wasn't paranoia at all? A chill ran through me as I realized this reunion might have had nothing to do with family bonding. What if they knew about the safety deposit box? What if that was why we were in Charleston? What if they had planned to extract its contents from me one way or another before abandoning me with the hotel bill? The coincidence seemed too great. Yet how could they know about something Richard had kept secret even from our daughter? Unless someone had told them. But who? My reflection stared back at me from the window glass. A woman I barely recognized. Silver hair I once colored religiously, now framed a face lined with years of smiles and tears. Eyes that had once sparkled with confidence now looked uncertain, haunted. When had I become this person? This doormat? This convenient wallet? No more, I whispered to my reflection, my breath fogging the cool glass. Not 1 minute more. As dawn began to lighten the sky, I made a decision. After breakfast, after the inevitable scene that would follow my actions last night, I would visit First National Bank. Whatever Richard had left in that box, whether it was money, documents, or secrets, it was time I claimed it. Time I understood why my husband, with his dying breath, had given me this key and this warning. Time I discovered what my family was really after. I was nursing my second cup of coffee in the hotel restaurant when the chaos erupted. The morning sunlight streamed through the tall windows, casting long rectangles of gold across the polished hardwood floor. I'd chosen a corner table, partially hidden behind a large potted palm. From here, I could watch the lobby without being immediately visible, a strategic position for what I knew was coming. The antique grandfather clock in the lobby had just chimed 8 when I heard the first outraged voice, Catherine's. My daughter had always projected well, a trait that served her in her career as a high school drama teacher, but made family disagreements particularly public. What do you mean our rooms have been cancelled? There must be some mistake. I took a slow sip of my coffee, noting how my hand trembled slightly against the porcelain. The coffee was bitter on my tongue, much like the words I knew would soon be directed at me. Thomas, the night manager who had processed my cancellation, had gone home hours ago. The morning staff, a young woman whose name tag read Amelia, was now facing my daughter's wrath. I couldn't see her face from my position, but her voice carried clearly across the lobby. I'm terribly sorry, ma'am, but the reservation was cancelled at 12:17 a.m. All charges were reversed to the original payment method. That's impossible. Who would... Catherine's sentence cut off abruptly. I could picture the exact moment realization dawned on her face. My mother. Where is she? I set my cup down and straightened my spine, preparing for the confrontation. I'd spent decades avoiding conflict, smoothing ruffled feathers, making peace at any cost, usually at cost to myself. Not today. They appeared like a small, angry mob. Catherine leading the charge, her auburn hair dyed to cover the gray she couldn't accept at 46. Still mussed from sleep, behind her trailed Robert, his usually carefully composed lawyer's face flushed with irritation. James followed, already on his phone, texting frantically. Diane and Melanie brought up the rear, exchanging whispers behind manicured hands. Catherine spotted me first. Her eyes narrowed as she stormed across the restaurant, weaving between tables of other guests who had paused mid-bite to watch the drama unfold. "Mother!" The word exploded from her like a bullet. "How could you do this to us? We've been kicked out of our rooms. All our things are packed in the hallway." I took another deliberate sip of coffee, letting the moment stretch. The restaurant had fallen silent, other diners pretending not to listen while hanging on every word. "Good morning, Catherine," I said, my voice steady despite the earthquake happening inside me. "Did you sleep well?" Her face contorted with disbelief. "Sleep well? Are you serious right now? We've been humiliated in front of the entire hotel staff. The rooms are booked solid for some medical conference, and there's nowhere else to stay within 20 miles. Robert stepped forward, placing a restraining hand on my daughter's arm. Always the peacemaker, at least in public. His voice dropped to a harsh whisper. "Eleanor, this is beyond inappropriate. We're family. Whatever issue you're having, this was not the way to handle it." I looked up at him. This man who had spent 20 years treating me like an inconvenient addition to his marriage, who sighed dramatically whenever I called their home, who forgot to invite me to Catherine's surprise 50th birthday party. "Family?" I repeated, the word tasting strange on my tongue. "Is that what we are, Robert? Because last night this family left me to handle a $40,300 hotel bill without so much as a warning." Catherine's face flushed. "That's what this is about. Money. For God's sake, Mother, we were going to sort it out today. There was no need for this childish revenge." The first knife twisted in my heart. I remembered another conversation, years ago, when Catherine had stood in my kitchen after Richard's funeral. "You're not helpless, Mother," she had said, voice sharp with impatience. "Stop acting like you can't manage without Dad. You're just holding on to the past, and frankly, you're becoming a burden." I had wept that night, alone in the house Richard and I had shared for 4 decades. My daughter thought I was grieving. I was, but not just for Richard, for the daughter I thought I knew. "Childish revenge," I echoed now. "Is that what you think this is?" James stepped forward, his handsome face arranged in the sympathetic expression he used when trying to manipulate someone. "Aunt Ellie, we know you've been having a hard time since Uncle Richard died. Perhaps you're not thinking clearly." "I'm thinking more clearly than I have in years," I interrupted, causing James to blink in surprise. I never interrupted. Eleanor the doormat, Eleanor the pushover, Eleanor who could be relied upon to back down. Diane nudged past him. "You've embarrassed us all, Eleanor." The staff was smirking as they handed us our bags. "Is that what you wanted? To make us look foolish?" I met her gaze steadily. "No, Diane. I simply canceled a reservation that I had paid for, since none of you seemed to value it." "Paid for?" Catherine's voice rose again. "What are you talking about?" I reached into my purse and removed the receipt, sliding it across the table. "I transferred the money 2 weeks ago. Every room, every meal, every service, all paid in advance by me." 5 pairs of eyes stared at the paper, then at me. The shock on their faces might have been comical under different circumstances. But at dinner last night, you said you weren't sure if you had enough to cover your portion," stammered Melanie, Robert's sister, who had invited herself along despite barely qualifying as family. "I lied," I said simply. "I wanted to see what would happen." The silence that followed was deafening. In that moment, I saw something shift in Catherine's eyes, a flash of guilt quickly masked by defensive anger. "Mother," she began, her voice dropping to that condescending tone she used when she thought I was being irrational. "You could have just talked to us instead of creating this spectacle." The second knife twisted. I remembered all the times I had tried to talk to her over the past 6 years. The unanswered calls, the abbreviated visits, the way her eyes glazed over whenever I spoke for more than 2 minutes. "I'm done talking," I said quietly, rising from my chair. "And I'm done being the family ATM that you only remember when bills come due." As I gathered my purse, Robert stepped forward, his lawyer face firmly in place now. "Eleanor, be reasonable. Where are we supposed to go? Everything's booked solid." I looked at each of them in turn. These people who shared my blood but apparently not my heart. "That," I said, "is no longer my problem." I retreated to my room, locking the door behind me and leaning against it as my legs finally gave way. My heart hammered against my ribs like a frightened bird. In 72 years, I had never spoken to my family like that, never stood my ground, never walked away from their demands. The adrenaline that had carried me through the confrontation was fading now, leaving me shaky and nauseated. Outside my door, I could hear the muffled sounds of my family arguing in the hallway. Catherine's voice rose occasionally above the others, sharp, indignant, wounded. I had hurt her. I knew. The knowledge sat like a stone in my stomach. Despite everything, she was still my daughter, my only child, the tiny baby I had cradled through sleepless nights, the little girl whose scraped knees I had bandaged, the teenager whose broken heart I had helped mend. When had we become strangers? I moved to the window, drawing back the curtains to gaze at Charleston's historic rooftops. The morning sun glinted off copper weather vanes and illuminated church steeples that had survived centuries of hurricanes and war. Below, tourists were already gathering in the courtyard, cameras ready, listening to guides in period costume, life moving forward, unaware of the small drama playing out in room 412. The room phone rang, startling me. I stared at it, watching it vibrate slightly with each shrill ring. 5 times, then silence. A minute later, it started again. I knew who it was. I let it ring. My cell phone buzzed next, Catherine's name flashing on the screen. I silenced it and placed it face down on the nightstand. What I needed now was clarity, not more accusations, not more manipulation. I moved to the bed where my small suitcase lay open. From a zippered compartment, I removed the blue silk scarf that had been Richard's last birthday gift to me. Carefully unwrapping it, I revealed the key. Small, brass, unremarkable, except for the weight of secrets it carried. Richard had given it to me 3 days before he died. I remembered the moment with perfect clarity. The antiseptic smell of the hospital room, the rhythmic beeping of monitors, the yellow afternoon light filtering through Venetian blinds. Richard had waited until the nurse left us alone, then motioned me closer with a frail hand. "Ellie," he'd whispered, his voice rasping from the tube they'd only recently removed. "There's something I need you to do." I'd leaned closer, desperate to memorize every detail of his face, the crow's feet at the corners of his eyes, the silver threading through his dark hair, the cleft in his chin that Catherine had inherited. Anything, I'd promised, meaning it with all my heart. He'd pressed the key into my palm, closing my fingers around it with surprising strength. "First National Bank in Charleston, box 4 in 3. Everything you might need is there." His blue eyes, clouded with pain but still sharp with intelligence, had held mine. "Tell no one, not family, not friends, especially not Catherine." "But why? Promise me, Ellie." "I promise," I'd said, bewildered but unwilling to cause him distress. "But Richard, why Charleston? We hardly know." "Because no one would look for it there," he'd interrupted, his voice dropping even lower. "It's safe. You'll understand when you need to. Just promise me you'll remember." The memory faded as I stared at the key in my palm. In 6 years, I had never visited the bank. At first, deep in grief, I'd forgotten about it entirely. Then when I remembered, it had seemed too difficult. A trip to Charleston, a city hundreds of miles from our home in Pennsylvania, just to satisfy curiosity about a box that Richard had said I'd only need someday. But now, that someday had arrived. And eerily, we were already in Charleston, a coincidence that suddenly seemed anything but random. A soft knock at the door interrupted my thoughts. Not the aggressive pounding I'd expected from Catherine or Robert, but something tentative, almost hesitant. "Who is it?" I called, quickly rewrapping the key in its silk cocoon. "It's James, Aunt Ellie. Just me. Can we talk?" James, my nephew, my sister's only child, orphaned at 14 when Marion and her husband died in a car accident. Richard and I had taken him in without hesitation, raised him alongside Catherine. He'd called us aunt and uncle instead of mom and dad. but in every way that mattered, he had been our son, or so I'd thought. I hesitated, studying the door as if I could see through it to the man standing on the other side. James had always been charming, able to talk his way into or out of anything. As a teenager, he'd used that charm to evade curfews and homework. As an adult, he'd parlayed it into a successful career in investment banking, a career that had faltered recently, though he was vague about the details when asked. Could I trust him now? Was this genuine concern, or another attempt to manipulate the situation? "Aunt Ellie, please," his voice came again. "I'm alone, I swear. I just want to make sure you're okay." Against my better judgment, I unlocked the door, opening it just enough to confirm he was indeed alone. James stood in the hallway, hands shoved in the pockets of his rumpled chinos, hair disheveled as if he'd been running his fingers through it repeatedly, a nervous habit from childhood. "5 minutes," I said, stepping aside to let him enter. He moved past me, bringing with him the faint scent of the expensive cologne Diane always gave him for Christmas. I noticed he looked tired, with dark circles under his eyes that hadn't been there at dinner last night. Or perhaps I just hadn't been looking closely enough. "They've gone to find somewhere else to stay," he said, perching awkwardly on the edge of the desk chair. "Catherine's furious, of course. Robert's trying to calm her down." "And Diane?" I asked, referring to his wife of 12 years, a woman who had always regarded me with barely concealed impatience. "Shopping," he said with a weak smile. "Diane's solution to every crisis." I remained standing, arms crossed. "What do you want, James?" He sighed, suddenly looking every day of his 41 years. To apologize, I guess. "It was wrong what they did to you last night. The hotel bill thing." "They?" I raised an eyebrow. "Not we." He had the grace to look ashamed. "Okay, what we did. It was Diane's idea originally, but I went along with it. We all did." I studied James's face, searching for any trace of the 14-year-old boy who had arrived at our doorstep, clutching a battered suitcase, eyes red-rimmed from crying, but chin lifted in defiance against his grief. I had held him that night as he finally broke down, his thin shoulders shaking with sobs against my chest. Richard had stood in the doorway, watching us with such tenderness that the memory still made my throat tighten. "Why, James?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. "Why would you do that to me?" He looked down at his hands, pianist's hands, long-fingered and elegant like his mother's. Marian had played beautifully. James had never had the patience to learn. "It's complicated," he muttered. "Uncomplicated for me," I said, steel entering my voice. "I think I deserve that much." He sighed, running those elegant fingers through his hair again. "We're all in a bit of financial trouble, okay? Catherine and Robert remortgaged their house to pay for Emma's college tuition. Diane's business is failing. The boutique lost its lease, and the new location isn't bringing in customers. And He trailed off, swallowing hard. "You what?" I pressed. "I made some bad investments. Really bad. I could lose my license, Aunt Ellie. Maybe worse." I felt a flicker of the old concern, the maternal instinct to protect him. I ruthlessly suppressed it. "So you thought you'd solve your problems by sticking me with a hotel bill I couldn't possibly afford on my pension? That's your explanation?" My voice rose, despite my efforts to keep it steady. He flinched. "No." "Well, yes, but it wasn't just about the money." "Then what was it about, James?" I demanded, my patience fraying. "Because from where I'm standing, it looks an awful lot like you all decided the old lady was an easy target. It's about Uncle Richard's safety deposit box," he blurted out, then immediately looked as if he regretted the words. The room seemed to tilt around me. I gripped the back of a chair to steady myself. "How do you know about that?" I whispered. James couldn't meet my eyes. "Diane overheard you on the phone with the bank last month. You were confirming the location. She told Catherine, and Catherine remembered Uncle Richard mentioning something about Charleston investments before he died." My mind raced. I had called First National to verify the box was still active after all these years. I'd been in my own kitchen, alone, or so I thought. But Diane had been visiting that weekend, staying in our guest room while in town for a retail convention. She must have been eavesdropping. So this whole family reunion in Charleston, Was Catherine's idea, James finished. She thought if we got you here, relaxed and happy, you might share whatever's in that box. We all assumed it was money, investments, stocks, maybe property deeds. Uncle Richard was always so private about finances. A cold fury washed over me, clearing away the fog of confusion and hurt. And when I didn't voluntarily offer to share this hypothetical fortune, you decided to force my hand by humiliating me at the front desk, make me desperate enough to reveal the box's contents. James had the decency to look ashamed. It sounds terrible when you put it like that. How else should I put it? My voice was quiet now, dangerously so. You used me, all of you, the people I loved most in this world. He leaned forward, eyes pleading. Aunt Ellie, we're desperate. Catherine might lose her house. Diane's about to declare bankruptcy, and I could be facing charges if certain transactions come to light. Uncle Richard had money. We all knew it. Money that could solve everything if you'd just be reasonable and share it. The last tattered remnants of my trust shredded at his words. Get out, I said, pointing to the door. Aunt Ellie, get out! I hadn't raised my voice like that since Catherine was a rebellious teenager, sneaking out to meet a boy Richard and I had forbidden her to see. James stood, hands raised in a placating gesture. Okay, but think about it, please. We're still family despite everything. Uncle Richard wouldn't want to see us suffer if he could prevent it. As he reached the door, a new thought struck me with the force of a physical blow. James, I said, stopping him with his hand on the doorknob. How did you know the box was at First National? I never mentioned the bank's name on that call. He froze, his back to me, shoulders suddenly tense. James? I repeated, a terrible suspicion dawning. Who told you it was First National? He turned slowly, his handsome face now carefully composed. In that moment, he looked so much like Richard that my heart contracted painfully. I have to go, he said, voice flat. Catherine's waiting. After he left, I sank onto the bed, mind reeling. They knew about the box. That much was clear. But they knew details I had never revealed, never spoken aloud to anyone except Richard on his deathbed. Someone else knew about the box. Someone who had shared that information with my family. But who? Richard had been emphatic about telling no one, not even Catherine. I pulled out the blue silk scarf again, unwrapping the key with trembling fingers. Whatever was in that box, I needed to see it now. Before anyone else could interfere, I changed quickly into a simple blue dress, one of the few items I'd brought that wasn't wrinkled from being hastily repacked, and slipped Richard's key into my pocket. As I reached for my purse, my phone buzzed with an incoming text. Unknown number. Don't go to the bank, Eleanor. Some secrets should stay buried. For everyone's sake. I stared at the message, ice flowing through my veins. I didn't recognize the number. There was no identifier, no clue to the sender. But one thing was clear. I wasn't the only one who knew about Richard's secret, and someone was very invested in keeping it that way. The morning air was thick with humidity as I stepped out of the hotel, the weight of the anonymous text message still pressing on my mind. Charleston bustled around me, horse-drawn carriages clip-clopping down cobblestone streets, tourists snapping photos of antebellum homes, locals moving with purpose through the historic district, none of them aware of the storm raging inside me. I clutched my purse tightly against my side, feeling the outline of my phone inside, now turned off to prevent any more unsettling messages. The key to Richard's safety deposit box seemed to burn through the fabric of my dress pocket. I had debated hiring a taxi, but First National was only 6 blocks away, according to the concierge, and I needed the walk to clear my head. 6 blocks to unravel a 6-year mystery. 6 blocks to discover what Richard had deemed important enough to hide from everyone, even our daughter. 6 blocks that suddenly felt like miles as my sensible shoes clicked against the uneven sidewalk. As I walked, I couldn't shake the image of James's face when I'd asked him how he knew about First National. That momentary flash of panic before his features smoothed into practiced nonchalance. James had always been a good liar, too good. Even as a teenager, he could talk his way out of almost any situation with a charm that disarmed teachers, police officers, and even Richard on occasion, but I had always seen through him. A mother knows, even if the child isn't biologically hers. A passing cloud dimmed the sunlight, casting the street in momentary shadow. I shivered despite the heat. Was I being watched? I glanced behind me, seeing only a young couple with a map and an elderly man walking a small dog. No one suspicious, no one following. Yet the feeling of being observed persisted, raising goosebumps along my arms. The anonymous text replayed in my mind. "Don't go to the bank, Eleanor. Some secrets should stay buried." Not a request, a warning, but from whom? Catherine wouldn't be so cryptic. James would have signed his name, tried to appear helpful. Diane was too direct for anonymous threats. Robert, perhaps. He was a lawyer, accustomed to careful wording, or someone else entirely. First National Bank appeared ahead, its columned facade reminiscent of a Greek temple, solid, imposing, eternal, a sanctuary for secrets. I paused across the street, studying the building. How many times had Richard stood in this exact spot, planning, calculating, preparing for a future he wouldn't live to see? What had driven him to create this contingency, this mystery, this final act of protection? Or was it confession? I crossed the street, my heart pounding as I climbed the shallow steps to the bank's entrance. The cool air conditioning washed over me as I stepped inside, momentarily taking my breath away. The interior was all polished marble and mahogany, whispered conversations, and the soft click of computer keys, old money and quiet power. A young woman at the reception desk looked up as I approached, her professional smile warm but impersonal. "Good morning, ma'am. How may I assist you today?" I cleared my throat, suddenly aware of how dry my mouth had become. "I need to access a safety deposit box, please. Number 410. Her fingers moved efficiently over her keyboard. "Of course. May I have your name?" "Eleanor Parker." More typing. A slight furrow appeared between her perfectly shaped eyebrows. "One moment, please." She picked up a phone, speaking in low tones I couldn't quite catch. My anxiety ratcheted up with each passing second. Had something happened to the box? Had someone already accessed it? An older man in a tailored gray suit approached, extending his hand. "Mrs. Parker, I'm William Harrington, branch manager. It's a pleasure to finally meet you." "Finally?" The word caught me off guard. "Have you been expecting me, Mr. Harrington?" A flicker of something, surprise, concern, crossed his face before his professional mask slipped back into place. In a manner of speaking, Dr. Parker made certain arrangements that suggested you might visit us someday. If you'll follow me. He led me through the main floor to a private elevator at the back of the building. We descended in silence to a sub-level where the safety deposit boxes were kept. The lighting was softer here, the air cooler, the sounds muffled, a place designed for discretion. Dr. Parker was a very thorough man, Harrington remarked as we walked down a carpeted hallway. Very detail-oriented. Yes, I agreed, unsure where this conversation was headed. Richard was always meticulous. Harrington nodded, stopping before a heavy door. He left specific instructions about Box 419. It was to be maintained indefinitely, fees automatically withdrawn from the account he established, and it was only to be accessed by you. Under no circumstances was anyone else to be permitted entry, regardless of legal documentation or familial connection. My throat tightened. Even in death, Richard was trying to protect me. From what? Harrington used his key card to open the door, revealing a room lined with metal drawers of varying sizes. He led me to a private viewing room, then left briefly, returning with a rectangular metal box. "I'll leave you to your privacy, Mrs. Parker. Take as much time as you need. When you're finished, simply press the button on the wall, and I'll return to assist you." The door closed behind him with a soft click, leaving me alone with Richard's final secret. I stared at the box, almost afraid to touch it. What would I find inside? Money, as my family suspected? Legal documents? Or something more personal? Letters, perhaps. Revelations that Richard couldn't bring himself to share in life. With trembling hands, I removed the key from my pocket and inserted it into the lock. It turned smoothly, as if the mechanism had been recently oiled. The lid lifted with a soft metallic sigh. Inside was a thick manila envelope, yellowed slightly with age, and a smaller white envelope with my name written on it in Richard's familiar handwriting. Beneath these lay several file folders, neatly labeled, and what appeared to be a small leather-bound journal. I reached for the white envelope first, carefully breaking the seal. Inside was a single sheet of Richard's personal stationery, the paper crisp and still smelling faintly of the sandalwood cologne he'd worn every day of our married life. My dearest Ellie, if you're reading this, then you found yourself in a situation where you needed what I've left for you here. I'm sorry I couldn't tell you everything while I was alive. I wanted to protect you, though perhaps that was my greatest mistake. The contents of this box will give you the truth, all of it. Some of it will be painful. Some may change how you see me, and perhaps others in our family. But knowledge is power, Ellie, and you deserve both. Whatever happens, remember that I loved you completely. That was never a lie. Always yours, Richard. A tear splashed onto the paper, blurring the ink of his signature. I quickly moved the letter aside, not wanting to damage this last message from my husband. With a deep breath, I reached for the manila envelope, sensing that whatever it contained would irrevocably change my life. The manila envelope felt unnaturally heavy in my hands. I turned it over, breaking the red wax seal that bore Richard's initials. RJP, Richard James Parker. His father's name, his grandfather's name, the name we had almost given to James before deciding he should keep his birth father's surname instead. Another lifetime ago, when family meant something different. Inside the envelope were documents, dozens of them, yellowed newspaper clippings, legal papers with official stamps and seals, photographs paper-clipped to typed reports. My hands trembled as I spread them across the table, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. The first document was a deed, property in Savannah, Georgia, that I'd never known we owned. The second was a bank statement showing an account with a balance that made my breath catch. The third was a life insurance policy on Richard that had apparently paid out to a trust I knew nothing about. But it was the fourth document that stopped my heart, a paternity test, dated 27 years ago. The subjects, Richard Parker and James Sullivan. The results, 99.98% probability of paternity. The room spun around me. I gripped the edge of the table, fighting a wave of dizziness that threatened to pull me under. Richard was James's biological father. How was that possible? My sister Marion had been married to Thomas Sullivan for 16 years before they died. James had been their only child, a miracle baby after years of trying, or so we'd all believed. My eyes raced over the rest of the documents, each revelation more shocking than the last. Bank transfers from Richard to Marion, dating back to before James was born. A handwritten agreement between them, signed but never notarized, outlining financial support. Letters, so many letters between my husband and my sister spanning years. An affair, a child, a conspiracy of silence. My world collapsed around me like a house of cards. Richard and Marion, the two people I had trusted most in this world, had betrayed me in the most fundamental way possible, and I had never suspected, not once in all those years. But someone else had discovered the truth. There were newer documents in the pile, emails printed on paper that wasn't yellowed with age, a threatening letter addressed to Richard just months before his death, demanding money for silence, a private investigator's report on Catherine, revealing her mounting debts and desperate financial situation, and then, most damning of all, a surveillance photo of James and Catherine meeting with a man I didn't recognize, dated 1 week before Richard's fatal heart attack. I felt physically ill, my stomach churning with the horror of what these documents suggested. Did they know? Had they always known? Catherine and James, half-siblings who had grown up as cousins, had they discovered Richard's secret and used it against him? Had they somehow caused his death? I thought of Richard in those final weeks, the stress he couldn't explain, the late-night phone calls he took in his study, the sudden decision to change his will and create this safety deposit box. He had been terrified, but not of dying. He had been terrified of something else, of someone else. The viewing room suddenly felt too small, the air too thin. I gathered the documents with shaking hands, stuffing them back into the envelope. I needed to get out, to breathe, to think. I pressed the button on the wall, and within moments Harrington returned. "Are you all right, Mrs. Parker?" he asked, concern evident in his voice. "You're quite pale." "I'm fine," I lied, clutching the envelope against my chest. "Just surprised by some of the contents." He nodded understandingly. "Dr. Parker mentioned you might be. He made one more provision that I should tell you about." Harrington reached into his pocket and withdrew a business card. "This is the contact information for a private security firm that Dr. Parker retained. He arranged for their services to be available to you should you ever access the box. All expenses are prepaid." I took the card, noting the embossed logo and the single name, Blackwood Security. "Why would I need security?" I asked, though I feared I already knew the answer. Harrington's expression remained carefully neutral. "Dr. Parker didn't share his reasons with me, Mrs. Parker. He simply made the arrangements. Richard had known. He had known that whatever was in this box would put me in danger from my own family." I thanked Harrington and left the bank, the envelope secure in my purse, the security firm's card burning a hole in my pocket. The morning had grown hotter, the humidity more oppressive, or perhaps it was just the weight of betrayal making it difficult to breathe. I walked blindly with no destination in mind, simply needing to move, to process, to outrun the terrible knowledge I now possessed. Charleston's picturesque streets blurred around me as tears filled my eyes. Richard, Marion, James, Catherine. Every relationship I had ever valued was built on lies. I found myself in a small park, collapsing onto a bench beneath the shade of a massive live oak, draped with Spanish moss. The tree had probably witnessed centuries of human drama, of secrets and lies, of betrayals and reconciliations. It would outlive this crisis too. But would I? I pulled out my phone, turning it on for the first time since leaving the hotel. Immediately it buzzed with notifications. Missed calls from Catherine, from James, from numbers I didn't recognize. Text messages demanding to know where I was, if I'd been to the bank, what I'd found, and one message from the same unknown number as before. "I tried to warn you, Eleanor. Now they know you've seen it. You're not safe at the hotel. Meet me at Forsyth Park by the fountain, 1 hour," as if summoned by the text. My phone rang in my hand, Catherine's name flashing on the screen. I hesitated, then answered. "Mother." Her voice was tight, controlled, not the fury I'd expected, which somehow frightened me more. "Where are you?" "Out walking," I said, trying to keep my own voice steady. "I needed some air after this morning. James told me he spoke with you." A pause. "About the safety deposit box." "Yes." I wouldn't give her more than that. "We need to talk, Mother. All of us. About Dad, about what he left behind, about what you found." Ice slid down my spine. She knew I'd been to the bank. How? "I don't think that's a good idea right now, Catherine," I said carefully. "It wasn't a request." Her voice hardened. "We'll be waiting in your hotel room. 1 hour." She hung up before I could respond. I sat frozen on the bench, my phone clutched in my hand, the oak's shadows shifting across my lap as a breeze stirred its ancient branches. 2 invitations, both with the same deadline. My daughter and her conspirators in my hotel room, or a mysterious stranger by a fountain. Neither option seemed safe. But after what I'd learned today, nowhere was safe. No one was trustworthy. The only choice was which danger to face first. Forsyth Park sprawled before me, its famous fountain spraying arcs of water that glittered in the afternoon sunlight. Tourists clustered around it, snapping photos and laughing, oblivious to the woman on the periphery, whose entire life had just shattered like fine crystal dropped on concrete. I clutched my purse containing the manila envelope, the evidence of decades of betrayal, close to my side, scanning the crowd for who? I didn't know who had sent the text, who was trying to warn me, who might be an ally in this nightmare. I only knew that returning to the hotel felt like walking into a trap. The ornate white fountain continued its eternal performance, water droplets catching the light, creating fleeting rainbows that disappeared as quickly as they formed. Like trust, I thought bitterly. Beautiful, essential, and impossible to hold on to once broken. "Mrs. Parker," the voice came from behind me, soft but clear enough to be heard over the fountain's splash. I turned to find a woman in her 40s dressed in business casual attire that wouldn't attract attention. Navy slacks, white blouse, sensible shoes. Nothing memorable except her eyes, sharp, assessing, the pale gray of winter skies. "You sent the texts," I said. It wasn't a question. She nodded once. "My name is Vanessa Blackwood. Your husband retained my firm's services 6 years ago." Blackwood Security, the card Harrington had given me at the bank. I'd been so overwhelmed by the contents of the safety deposit box that I'd barely registered it. "How did you know I'd accessed the box today?" I asked, maintaining a careful distance between us. "We've been monitoring it since Dr. Parker's death," she answered matter-of-factly. "We were alerted the moment you used the key. And the texts, the warnings? Also part of our protocol. Dr. Parker was very specific about the potential risks to you if certain individuals discovered you had accessed the contents." My heart constricted painfully. Even from the grave, Richard was trying to protect me. The same Richard who had betrayed me with my own sister. The same Richard who had lied to me every day of our marriage. My emotions whiplashed between gratitude and rage, love and betrayal. "Why should I trust you?" I demanded, suddenly aware of how exposed we were in the open park. Vanessa didn't seem offended by the question. "You shouldn't trust anyone right now, Mrs. Parker, but Dr. Parker paid my firm very well to ensure your safety, and we take our contracts seriously." She gestured to a path leading away from the fountain. "We should move. Your hotel room is being watched." Cold fear trickled down my spine. "By whom?" "Your nephew. Or should I say, your stepson." Her expression remained neutral, but I flinched as if she'd struck me. "James Sullivan has been in communication with several individuals of concern since you left the bank. Your daughter arrived at the hotel 30 minutes ago. They're waiting for you." I gripped the strap of my purse tighter, feeling the outline of the documents inside. "What do they want?" "What everyone in this situation wants, Mrs. Parker. Money, control, absolution." She began walking, clearly expecting me to follow. "Dr. Parker amassed considerable wealth that isn't reflected in his official estate. Property, investments, offshore accounts. Assets that would solve your family's various financial problems quite neatly." I hurried to keep pace with her, my sensible shoes pinching as we moved quickly along the gravel path. "But why keep it secret? Why not just leave it all in his will?" "Because it wasn't all acquired legally," she said bluntly. "And because your daughter and nephew attempted to blackmail him shortly before his death." The words hit me like physical blows. I stumbled and Vanessa smoothly took my elbow, steadying me without breaking stride. "That's not possible," I protested, even as my mind raced back to the surveillance photo in the safety deposit box. Catherine and James meeting with an unknown man. Catherine found out about James's true parentage," Vanessa interrupted, her voice clinical, detached. "She discovered financial records suggesting your husband had been paying your sister hush money for years. Rather than confronting him directly, she and James decided to use the information for leverage. They needed money, she for her underwater mortgage, he for some unfortunate investment decisions. They thought they could pressure Dr. Parker into an early inheritance. We reached a black sedan parked at the far end of the park. Vanessa opened the rear door, but I hesitated before getting in. "How do you know all this?" I asked, suspicion flaring anew. "Because I was the one who investigated them for your husband," she replied, holding my gaze steadily. "And because I was with Dr. Parker when he received the final blackmail call, the one that triggered his heart attack." The world tilted beneath my feet. Catherine and James had effectively killed Richard with their betrayal. My daughter and the boy we had raised as our own had contributed to my husband's death. "Mrs. Parker," Vanessa's voice cut through my spiraling thoughts. "We need to go. Now. You're not safe here. And you're not safe at the hotel. Where would we go? I asked, feeling suddenly every one of my 72 years. Somewhere secure, where you can review the rest of the documents and decide what you want to do next. She glanced at her watch. Your family is expecting you back at the hotel in 15 minutes. When you don't appear, they'll start looking. We need to be gone by then. I thought of Catherine waiting in my hotel room, of the carefully constructed speech she was undoubtedly preparing, part threat, part manipulation, designed to extract whatever wealth she believed I had discovered. I thought of James, who shared Richard's blood but apparently none of his integrity. I thought of the others, Robert, Diane, Melanie, all complicit in their own ways. My things, I said weakly. My clothes, my medication. Already retrieved and in the trunk, Vanessa replied. Dr. Parker's instructions were comprehensive. Of course they were. Richard had always been meticulous, always 10 steps ahead. Even in betrayal, even in deception, he had been thorough. I slid into the back seat of the sedan, the leather cool against my legs. Vanessa closed the door and walked around to the driver's side. As we pulled away from the curb, I watched Forsyth Park recede through the tinted window. The fountain, the oak trees, the carefree tourists, all shrinking into the distance like the life I had believed was mine. They're still my family, I said softly, more to myself than to Vanessa. Despite everything, her eyes met mine briefly in the rearview mirror. Family is complicated, Mrs. Parker. It can be your greatest strength or your most dangerous vulnerability. Dr. Parker understood that better than most. Yes, I thought bitterly. My husband had certainly understood the complexities of family, creating secret children, maintaining decades of deception, protecting some members while betraying others. And now I had to decide what to do with the power he had posthumously placed in my hands. The documents in my purse could destroy my daughter and James. They could expose Richard's illegal financial activities. They could tear down what remained of our family's reputation. Or they could remain secret, as they had for decades. As Vanessa navigated through Charleston's historic streets, taking deliberate turns and doubling back occasionally to ensure we weren't followed, I gazed out at the city Richard had chosen for his final secret. Beautiful, historic Charleston, a city built on wealth and privilege, on the backs of the powerless, its elegant facades hiding centuries of secrets and lies. How fitting that it should be the stage for our family's final act. Sometimes the greatest act of courage isn't standing up to your enemies, but facing the painful truths about those you love most. As I sit here now, years after that fateful night in Charleston, I've learned that family isn't always defined by blood or obligation. It's defined by respect, honesty, and genuine care. The hardest lesson wasn't discovering my husband's betrayal or my daughter's deception. It was accepting that I deserved better all along. What would you have done in my position? Would you have exposed every secret in that safety deposit box, bringing your family to their knees? Or would you have chosen, as I did, to hold on to your dignity and walk away? Sometimes true power isn't in destruction, but in the quiet strength it takes to rebuild your life on your own terms. The family that abandoned me at that hotel counter thought I was weak. They never realized that forgiveness requires far more courage than revenge. If my story touched you today, please take a moment to like this video and share it with someone who might need to hear that it's never too late to reclaim your worth. Subscribe to follow more real-life stories of courage, betrayal, and redemption. Remember, the next chapter of your life is always waiting to be written, and you alone hold the pen. Thank you for listening to my journey.